While in psych class, we learned that the DSM-5, the Mental Illness Disorder Diagnosis book, deemed that an addiction to food, so in other words obesity, is now a mental illness coming out this May. This means that obesity is now a mental disorder, not a behavior or a choice. So someone cannot choose whether or not they're addicted to food because something in their brain triggers how they see it and perceive and how they want food.
So we were wondering, how does language or the words that you choose to describe what you are saying affect the way that society perceives an issue? In this case, it would be obesity.
Because language choice affects meaning, therefore meaning can easily be construed. And when meaning is construed, clear communication is not present, making it hard for someone to speak to another person because thoughts are not properly portrayed. So rather than saying you struggle with your weight because you have an addictive behavior towards food, someone might say you struggle with your weight because you have a mental illness that creates an addiction to food. You can see the use of the word mental illness to food rather than an addictive behavior towards food changes the concept that someone behaves in a negative way towards food, that they want food and they are choosing to help themselves to more than they should, rather than something that they can't control, which is what the word mentally ill prescribes.
On the other hand, you could be saying or asking us that one can understand a perspective on an issue through the body language and facial expressions that they use. So the way that they move or just the look on their face when they're saying something to you can also portray meaning. But we came to the conclusion that the only thing that really portrays meaning is language. So the words that you use. Body motions and facial expressions mostly portray emotion, and that can be different than meaning.
I know also what a lot of people say is it's not what you say, it's how you say it. That's what my mom likes to tell me all the time. But I think your word has a lot of impact because the tone of your voice can change what you're trying to say, yes, but you have to use diction to portray that tone. So if you're using the word mentally ill, you can use it in a negative or positive way based on the tone of your voice, but you couldn't create that tone without the word mentally ill. However, the word mentally ill brings up a lot of questions because what technically defines someone who's mentally ill? In the DSM-5, we learned that mentally ill is defined as something that is in any various condition characterized by a behavior to such an extreme that it impacts your daily living, so it keeps you from functioning.
But then you have to ask yourself, how do we know when a behavior keeps you from functioning, and what are the behavioral norms? Because the question, how do we know when a behavior keeps you from functioning, takes a huge role in how to define a mental illness. And then what are behavioral norms? What we define as a behavioral norm might be completely different from what someone else defines as a behavioral norm. And so behavioral normalities obviously stem from social normalities. And these are created from in-groups and out-groups, and then group mentality and propaganda. So I might view a mental illness as I don't have, according to what the DSM-5 says, I don't have a certain type of mental illness. So I might view it as something bad, or I might view them like sick or just not being able to live their life the way that they should. But someone who does have a mental illness or has a family member with a mental illness views it completely different, and the introduction of this new mental illness might be seen as a good thing to them.
Also, taking on another perspective, you can look at how a doctor would view the mentally ill. A doctor might be excited because obesity is never a good thing in our society, and typically if you have an addiction to food, you will be more obese. And so a doctor, now that it's portrayed as a mental illness, the mentally ill are going to have to seek treatment for it, meaning that they will have to lower their body weight, meaning they will become more healthier, which is what a doctor has always wanted for a patient, obviously. But at the same time, it's also a concerning concept to a lot of society because if an addiction to food is now a mental illness based on the fact that it's keeping someone from functioning properly, that's just categorizing people into more and more groups. And how, if someone is addicted to an inanimate object, what other objects are we addicted to? For example, when we're trying to do our homework, I know Shelby and I do this a lot, but when we're trying to do our homework, we go on Twitter or we go on our phones or we text each other, and that's an interruption from our daily living. So are we technically addicted to the internet for having that interruption to our daily living? To what extent are we all addicted in some way?
Or is it something? Did it turn into a social norm? Because everyone does this, as you can see. This sounds bad, but when we're on Twitter and we're supposed to be doing our homework, we see other people doing the same exact thing. So does then that turn into a social norm instead of not behavioring or properly functioning?
Mm-hmm. So this can imply, the word mentally ill can imply that you are away from the social normality, but that can also be taken as an excuse. Because the United States has always been ridiculed for being obese and having really terrible eating habits. So is this term mentally ill creating a meaning or implying that there is an excuse to keep the United States from having to own up to not being fit, rather than having to deal with their fitness and learning how to manage their weight? They're having to just be diagnosed, and then they can call themselves mentally ill, rather than having to deal with an issue face on.
Or this could mean that the psychologists or the DSM-5 who created this, they want to provide more support and help for the mentally ill. They want to make a change in the United States by giving them the opportunity to get more money or support. Because when something is a mental illness, they get more insurance coverage for it, and they get more resources to help them take control of their problem. So this could mean that they are making more people, they're putting more people into the spectrum in the DSM-5, that they want more people to be healthy, or they want them to get over their illness.
Mm-hmm. This can positively affect society as well, because people who pay taxes, which is basically everyone, now are more understanding as to why they have to give their tax dollars to help things like this, because coverages and finances are spent more wisely with the new expansions on the DSM-5, because it now gives a name to what people are spending their tax dollars on. The word mentally ill creates sympathy within the people who are paying their tax dollars to support this. Rather than before, they were frustrated because it was a behavior choice that they had to pay for because someone else was choosing to live their life in an unhealthy way, which negatively affected society. But now that the word mentally ill is put on the obese people in our society, taxpayers have more sympathy towards them and feel less reluctant to pay their taxes.
So some limitations that this has is fast food and other unhealthy foods that are so common in the U.S. feed to the economy with their lower prices. So that means the customers that are being attracted to this are usually the ones that are struggling with their weight, because they might not, it's easily accessible. They can easily get it because it's so cheap and it's so readily available because it's fast food. And so if they're struggling with this weight, then they succumb to the fast food, and then they end up not getting any better because it's so easily accessible. And so if money is tight, this is what they turn to. And then this also plays how the food is served, and the fast food's tricks to buying or to serving the food also feeds into their mental disorders, because they have very large portions, and then the special straws that help make you drink more and faster, so you continually go to get more because you're drinking it so fast, makes people get more and they want more. And the propaganda only limits the patient in the convenience, quickness, and ease of dealing with their mental illness. So this will just make them, it always just makes them want more.
And then you can see that there's an in-group and an out-group. When you have the buyers and the sellers, you have the people who are selling the fast food, who are selling to the people who are typically more obese. So there's that separation of groups. And you can also see that separation of groups when you look at the difference between the fit and the obese. Because the people who appear to be less fit are perceived as obese, because they are, but now they're going to be perceived as mentally ill. And so the fit now feel emotionally, because people perceive them as mentally ill now, they'll feel less frustrated and more empathetic for those who have a food addiction and won't mind paying their dues and helping them out. Another real-world situation that can portray how important language is with meaning is when you look at the relationship between races within our society. And I know it's kind of easier for us to relate to that because I know we do struggle with obesity, but a lot of things that we talk about in school are with race. So
there is an implication that the word African American and Black can be used interchangeably, and we can use them whenever they want because they suggest the same thing. But this really isn't true, because in reality they are completely different. Because a Black person is really broad, but an African American person really generalizes it and puts it into Africans who are American. And so society generalizes them because of their skin. But Caucasians, as we are the outgroup, we misuse this concept because we do not assume
we don't really say that when we refer to ourselves, we would call ourselves white. We wouldn't say, oh, I'm Italian and Irish. And she wouldn't say that
I'm German.
She wouldn't say that she's German to people. We just refer to ourselves as white because that's how people see us. However, why is it bad when we say, oh, they're Black? Or the word is so broad that it can be insulting. But if we use the word African American interchangeably, that word is so narrow that can also be insulting. So the importance of using the correct word is changing the meaning of the word. So this concept is limiting in the sense that using the words Black, white, African American to categorize different races is limiting in the sense that it is creating a generalization for different people. So we're again putting people into different categorizations and grouping them. And this is creating a bigger gap between in-groups and out-groups because we're in-grouping ourselves and we're out-grouping other people by calling them these words using our language to create a bigger gap in between the two races.
Language has a very large impact on what you're trying to say, and so we have to be really careful with the words that we pick because, as we have discussed, every single word has a specific meaning that was given to it by someone, and we have to use it to the way that society has accepted that word and how that word has been portrayed as normal, because if not, it could be taken in a different way or it could be taken wrong.